Okay, hello and welcome to my talk about environmental storytelling. I'm Don. I'm creative lead at the game studio Okomotive, which is a small indie studio in Zurich, Switzerland. And I'm also not a writer, but I will talk about the environmental storytelling we did in our game, Far Lone Sales, which is about the journey of a US player with an interesting, with a big vehicle through an atmospherical world that is mostly a dried out seabed, and you get all of the story through the environment and without any words and without any dialogue. Just a disclaimer: it has words in these presentations, but we did the storytelling with the help of the objects instead of dialogue with characters and people, how we heard in the last example. So this doesn't mean that the story isn't about characters, but it's the environment is telling the stories about these characters and about the world through the visuals. So this talk has two parts. The first one is types and tools, and I will quickly show some tools to use to communicate the story with the environment. And the second one will be how we use these tools and how our process was with our project during the development of Changing Tides. So I will start with an example from Bioshock, and with fairly obvious environmental storytelling tool, the graffiti and writings, which shows very directly what this visual wants to tell us, and it can show the emotions and the personality of the person who wrote it. For example, it's often written in blood, and so it can have show these emotions. The second one are posters, or also like branding, to show more indirectly what's happening in this world and maybe connected with a certain event. But you see this also all around in example of Bioshock, and you can certainly make connections between these posters to know what's important in this world and to know which events happened. Next up is the indication of action. Here is an example from an Overwatch map where a robot was smashed into a wall. And depending on the action and depending on how detailed the visuals are, there can be a lot of information be read from these visuals. So we can also tell at which time it happened. For example, here there's smoke still coming out of this robot, so it probably happened not long ago. Then we have indication of purpose. Here we see a room full of clocks, and it probably tells us that it's a room from a clockmaker or a clock collector. And compared to the action, it can give us a neutral information about what world we are in or what room this specifically is, and it gives us a lot of context. Speaking of context, I have the next one is a bit of a broad one. It's the environment style, and this can be different things. So depending on the game, it can be the architecture, the landscape, the colors, maybe the weather, and it gives us it's like a foundation for the whole action that can happen on top of that. So these tell us context for the location, for the time period, which people were living in. Maybe they were aliens, and also which state or which situation this location is in. So if it's a rich city, or if it's a overgrown post-apocalyptic city, that this can tell us a lot of what actions actually are possible in this world. Here's an example of what we can read out of a picture. Again, this is an Overwatch map, and we can put down the location that it's in Germany, because the name of this brewery is written in German. It's not the translation for the German game. It's really written in German here. So We can see it's in German. It has old buildings, but is it in the Middle Ages? No. There's some signs there with these traffic signs that can give us the information. Oh, it's probably around the present, and in this case, the near future. Then we see some robots, which probably are a bit hard to see on the screen, but there are the destroyed robots hanging around, and this can give us the information that there was a fight with these robots, and the fact that these robots are also overgrown with moss, it tells us that this didn't happen very recently. So now up to the next step is the creation process, and so this was also not planned from the beginning. It was a process for us to get this right, and at the beginning we also skipped some steps which will be seen later in the talk. First, I will show you a trailer of the game to give you an impression. Okay, so we've seen a few locations from the game, and we've seen that you drive through this world with this vehicle, and mostly you see the landscape in the background, and mostly big objects and buildings that tell us a bit what happened in this world and what's the mood of this scene. To go through this step by step, I have chosen one example locations from the game, which we've also seen some short snippet in the trailer, which is an abandoned village, which was built in a windy environment. Step one is the background story, and this is also a step we did a lot. We did it at the beginning of the game, and it was important for us to get a foundation. To build upon that and to make a connecting background story for the whole world, and to decide what's important in this world, what's possible in this world, and I think also a lot of this isn't really told in the game, but it helped us a lot to create the plot, which is the next point. So. Because we don't have any characters in the game, the plot isn't really an interaction between the player and different characters, but it's an interaction between the player and the environment, and also a lot of it was done with the gameplay. So this plot is then told at different plot points, and we try to focus on our storytelling at several points where it's possible to show all this information to the player, because it's so difficult, because the player is always moving. Here in this example, I just forgot, the example before that was the background story of the environment was that the people tried to follow the sea, which was slowly receding, and they had to build new towns and new villages. And they wanted to build this village in this area, but as soon as they built it, they discovered that this is a really dangerous area because of hurricanes, and these hurricanes damaged the parts of the village, and they had to move on, and they had to leave this newly built village there, and had to continue on with the journey. And the plot here tells us, so the player enters this area, so the player drove through the night, and the sun slowly rose, and then the player enters the area. And there are hopes for the player, because you see that there are a lot of buildings, and before that it was really lonely and desolate. So there are these buildings and this construction give hope to the player, so that there may be some people, but later on, at the next point, these hopes get crushed, and there aren't any people there. And in the end, the player actually gets in confrontation with this hurricane. So we didn't want to just tell the story in the environment and that through information, but we actually wanted to interact, to give interaction points between the player and the story. In our game, it was really important to really focus and decide what or which information we can and want to tell the player, because it has to be really simple, because of this big environments, and because we couldn't show very detailed information and text to the player. So we had to really focus this information down, which was then, so the first information point was there is a town and there are maybe people. Then, oh no one lives there. And the third information point was that a hurricane destroyed this area. And through the connections with these informations, it's possible to get more from this background story, and to have a sort of development for the player and for the story. And then maybe in best case we can even create emotions. So the first step we actually see something in the game. So everything before that was just conception and written down plans, and now we have to find a solution how we can show this in the game. And now the different tools I told you earlier about come to action, and they have to be used accordingly for the situation. But in Fowler and Sales, these were mostly big, well visible buildings and constructions or destructions in the environment. I will go through these different tools we used. And this is chronologically in the game. So at the beginning, the player arrives in this area, and there are wind turbines in the background. So the first sign is, there's people who build these turbines, and there's wind. Next step is this billboard that gives us the tease about, there's a village in the coming, and there's also some first buildings in the background. Also, again, there's a small wind turbine to show, there's wind. And at this point, the players arrives in the village, and the buildings and the houses are empty. There isn't any smoke coming out of the chimneys, and there isn't any light. The windmill in the background doesn't turn the wheel, and it's similar to a ghost town, which we tried to give this impression on it. It's a newly built ghost town in a way. And then the player arrives at the destroyed part of the village, and we really it wasn't easy to show that there was a hurricane that destroyed this village, but we tried to make this road or the way the hurricane moved through the village as visible as possible, and to have vehicles on the top of the roofs of the building, so you can hopefully imagine what happened there. And the climax of this area is then that the player reaches the hurricane, and then the hurricane chases the player, and the knowledge that previously was introduced now really is important, and is important for the player, and that it really affects the player. So the previous parts were mostly about storytelling, but I think one of the most important parts is the game design here. And I mentioned it earlier that the player is always moving with the vehicle, and we try to have situations and places to stop this movement, and to get to a point where we actually could tell a story. And so we had to create a moment or like a break for the player, to show detailed information about the background story. And the game design can work with or against the story. And it's always a good idea to guide the player as much as possible if you want to tell a very detailed story. And one example could be that you're stuck in an elevator, and you see a lot of things through this elevator window, and you actually can't look anywhere else. So it's very linear in this case, but it helps to tell environmental storytelling. We used big scale and repetition for when there's a lot of movement and a lot of action, and also a lot of gameplay for the player. And when we actually could slow the vehicle down, we used a lot more of like decorations, small decorations, and maybe these billboards and pictures of certain people actually. Here we see like an example of this area, and mostly when there were a lot of buildings, we had time to tell the story through the environment, and at the more empty areas, we wanted to give the player more time for the gameplay and for the mechanics. We created this pacing which worked sometimes better, sometimes worse, but it was really a process of figuring this out. So now, did it all work? Did the player actually, or did the different players actually get the story we wanted to tell? And it's not an easy question, because we see comments on Steam, and we hear the story of the different players. And there's certainly a lot of people who got the story right, and there's probably a lot of people who only got parts of the story. But it was really satisfying to read a lot of these summaries of the whole story on Steam, which were like several pages, where they really made every detail of the story right. And we haven't imagined that it would be possible in this way to figure it out. Because it's hard to test it, because we all know the story in the development team, and we can't just unknow the story. So I would say it did work for some players, but there are definitely some things we try to do better next time. But I think that's it for the talk. Thank you very much.